This is actually a repeat of an earlier session that we had from 2 to 3. No surprise, the previous one was like almost 70, 80 folks, but now you are the special one, the chosen one. So you get individual attention now. Yes, so we're going to make it very interactive. So the focus of our session, to simply put it in, we really want to show you live how you can go from an application where the user experiences logging in via username and password to completely a passwordless experience. What does it take to accomplish that goal, right? We'll try to show you the inner workings, what you as the owner of the application or the enterprise needs to do. And before that, we'll give you a primer in terms of what's the technology underneath that really makes it everything come together. And what are some of the things that you need to be aware about. The second part is around ATO or account takeover. Right? While eliminating passwords is indeed one of the core building blocks in achieving the end goal of account takeover, right? How do you defend, how do you protect against that? One needs to be aware that when it comes to account takeover, you need to think in terms of your customer life cycle. And account takeover is always predicated upon the fraudsters finding the weakest link within the life cycle. And we'll talk about it and why it's really important. In terms of introduction, I probably want to first introduce Balu. He is the brain behind, he is the smartest in the room probably. He's going to show you actually what happens. And I'm going to set the stage in terms of the technology that we use and how we accomplish it. I want you all to look at this. This is, I would call it as one of the simplest way to represent your customer life cycle. The focus here is the CIAM part, not the workforce. Today, as an enterprise, depending upon your business that you're in, the first and the foremost thing is you have an application or a service that you're delivering via multiple channels. You could have a web application, you could have a mobile app, some of you might have a branch, a kiosk, a public system, ATMs, chatbots, call center. These are all the avenues through which you're servicing your customer, end customer. Now, when it comes to end customer, keep in mind that that customer has tons of devices. They could be Windows, Microsoft Windows, your Hello devices, Apple devices, Google devices, laptops, all kinds of devices with varying capabilities within those platforms. As a result, they may come from different types of operating systems. So that is on the devices of the user. Now, the same customer within your ecosystem, you might have a customer that you have never seen before, and you're trying to onboard them. So you have different principles, how you want to onboard. How do you trust that user for the first time? Yes, you've onboarded someone. How do you authenticate at the front door? Yes, you have authenticated that user. What does it take to really make sure that you are assessing the risk throughout the journey of that user within your application at all times, and that your identity infrastructure is capable of taking actions in real time based upon the assessment of the risk at that instant of time within that application. Now, they may also perform sensitive actions, whether it is changing the profile, whatever that is. It could be a financial transaction. Do you assess the same way that you would assess at other parts of the application? So when it comes to account takeover, you need to look at this entire life cycle and determine the potential weakest links and understand how do you ensure that you're addressing that. So what does that really mean? When it comes to passwordless solution, when you want to build your own solution using FIDO as a technology that we are going to discuss very shortly, knowing, is FIDO going to solve all my problems? Or how do I handle, after the authentication is done, what do I have in order to monitor the risk? What about incognito mode or corner cases or scenarios that there may not be a set answer in order to address from an account takeover perspective? The second aspect is, yes, you can fortify, but you also have a responsibility around customer experience. How do I balance the two? So the takeaway from this that I really want all the identity experts to think about is you are catering to multiple lines of business or channels your solution should support. When you think about building an identity infrastructure or a solution that supports defending against account takeover and having the best customer experience. And yes, eliminating password is one of those core building blocks that will allow you to get there. So with that, maybe the first question, what do you think a conservative estimate in terms of the percentage of people who are using the same password on multiple properties? Maybe right here we can, what percentage of people do you think are reusing the same password? Majority, okay. Lot of studies. In fact, the minimum or the conservative one is actually 65%, right? I'm sure it's probably much, much higher, but by conservative estimates by Google and other folks was that, yes, 65% of us are reusing it. As a result, we all have very strong password guidelines, regulation. It has to be 8 characters. It must include a symbol. It must include a number. It must really have all these. You cannot reuse sequential numbers. How much do you think it takes in dark web, starting from scratch, to really break into one of these things via brute force? How much time do you think? A complex password today, it takes less than 39 minutes with all the complexities that we are building. So what do? We said, hey, let's compensate for our weak passwords by adding more methods. How are people really performing ATOs? Yes, all the passwords that are there, they have built automated systems. You can actually go and then buy in dark web, in the marketplace, a credential stuffing that can go up to 100,000 logins per second. They're going to really run through their bot, and they will tell you, okay, of these 100,000, here are 50,000 that really went through these 10 websites, and you can reuse them. Right? Of course, rest of the stuff I don't need to preach to the choir here. All of these things have become very prevalent when it comes to ATO, or in other words, what really caught my eye is with just under 8 billion as the world population, there are 24 billion credentials that are circulating in the dark web today. So I would almost say more than 3 of our credentials that we probably use are all out there right in this room. So the mitigation methods, we all have been very familiar, and we have been, I would say, victims of it. let's introduce two-factor authentication, SMS OTPs, or let's have our users download authenticator apps, whatever they are, right? Let's ask more security questions. So the assumption here is we have assumed that the password is compromised, and now we are trying to add yet another form of authentication. The better way is really to see how we can fix the root of the problem, which have been the passwords. Many of you are aware with all the recent security issues, even the White House basically released a very strong mandate, especially those who work in the federal government. We all are familiar with the CAC cards, and the next gen of CAC cards is the PIY cards, which is all are going to be FIPS compliant. They will have biometric as an identity verification. Or for the general public, or the second method that they recommended is indeed all around WEBAUTHN, or the standard sort of W3C, which is all around FIDO. So this brings us to a topic probably you have heard a lot in this conference, right? The FIDO Alliance. The key thing about FIDO Alliance, which is I want to really focus on FIDO 2, is one, this has been in works for quite some time. As you can see, the board members, primarily driven by what I call as, for any technology to become mainstream, three things have to come together. That's why sometimes they say, hey, you're too early to the market. The market is not ready. So when does something really succeed in the market? Is one, the ecosystem of the device manufacturers have to support that technology. So today, you almost take any hardware platform, whether it is Windows laptops, Macs, your Android phones, your Surfaces, your iPhones, all of them today support biometric. And we will see how that is a crucial piece in the ecosystem in driving passwordless adoption. Just because the hardware supports doesn't mean it can become mainstream. You also need the software. Software in terms of the operating system, in terms of browsers, in terms of the protocol, and that is the FIDO2 standard, which is the WEBAUTHN. And you will see that majority of all the browsers today, all the hardware underlying platforms, they do support from a software perspective. And the third and the most important one is the consumer itself. The consumers have to be ready to adopt passwordless as an option. And today, the adoption rate are much higher, primarily because one, almost more than 50% of the folks are aware, and some of them have been victim as a result of their password, and they are more amenable now to say, hey, there is a better solution, and you need to go through this registration process. So the adoption rates are much higher because of the consumer education, either because of the breaches or just because of the awareness as a result of everything that's happening around. And this is really what is needed for any technology to become mainstream. And FIDO Alliance is a crucial part of that. So what are the benefits? I would categorize these four things really contributed. And if you look at it, security and convenience. That's a fine balance, right? We always say, how do you drive a fine balance between customer experience and security? And FIDO really tried to address that. Security or privacy in the form of ensuring that the user's identity never leaves the device. not to get too technical, but the underlying concept is what is called as a PKI infrastructure, or think about a public and a private key, or something that is very unique to you as a user, to that particular device, to that particular application, and it always stays on the device. It always stays with you. It only is available through your fingerprint, through your Face ID, through something that truly recognizes who you are as a person. And that's about security. About privacy, knowing that you are not sharing that information with anyone else, with any company. Convenience from the fact that any device that you get today, there is a new iPhone. You go buy it. You are able to basically transfer the trust. You are able to use it on that. You go buy a new laptop. Yes, it's available. You use Chrome. You use Edge. You use Safari. Yes, it is available. It's convenient. And second, if you do it right, the solution is scalable. How many of you heard about the recent announcement on passkeys? A lot of you folks, yes. We strongly believe that that's a step in the right direction. Right? What they announced in essence is really increasing or giving more weightage to the convenience factor. So now if you have any of the devices, yes, the security folks might take a step back and question, oh, now you just now told me that the keys will never leave the hardware, but now you're making a copy of it in iCloud, your keychain, and so that your convenience is enhanced, while trusting the big boys to do the right thing in ensuring that those keys are secure. I would say passkey is a great step in the right direction based upon the use case that you're really going after. Right? And we at Transmit not only believe that it is a step in the right direction, but if you choose, and we will leverage all the work done by the three big boys in terms of passkey to further enhance and evolve what we are doing when it comes to delivering passwordless as a service, and you will see that. So the key component that I was saying until now is this WEBAUTHN. Right? So slowly getting into the nitty-gritty details of how this passwordless solution works under the hood. You have your platform, whether it is your laptop, whether it is your mobile device, right, whether it is your iPad, you have an operating system. As I was saying earlier, in the ecosystem, every operating system today supports the building blocks of FIDO. Every browser that you're going to invoke on top of that particular hardware supports WEBAUTHN. Different authentication modalities from a biometric perspective. It could be something that you can attach, like the UB keys, the dongles, or any of those things, or it could be your Touch ID, Face ID, all of those biometric. So that's the ecosystem that is available right now. And yes, on top of that, you have your application, which is running or being invoked through the web browser. On the right-hand side is what you have, the FIDO server, the FIDO service, or all the key management. And we'll go in depth a little bit and understand how does this all come together when it comes to enrolling a user to completely a passwordless solution, and yet meets that key guidelines of security, privacy, convenience, and hopefully being able to scale. So how does this all work? I'll try to dumb this down. For the first time, you want to enroll somebody into a passwordless service. Let's assume you have a device, whatever device, your Android, your iOS, your Mac OS, your Surface, And the whole concept over here is for a given application, I want you to always remember three things: the user, the device, the domain or the application, right? So you have an application, you have a user, you have a device, and you want them to register. What happens is when you want to register a user on that specific device for that specific application through a process of key generation, there is going to be something called as a private key that is generated, and it is stored within the hardware of that device. Anyone knows what it is called if it is stored on a laptop? I heard that someone? Yes, it is indeed TPM. So you get this. Thank you. Sorry. Oops. So the TPM is a chip. It's a hardware. Equivalent of that on iPhone. Anyone? What is it called? Secure Enclave. Keychain is a software part, right? Yes, you'll still get it. Okay. There you go. Yes. So secure enclave, secure element on the Android side, right? This is a hardware chip where that key is stored. It never leaves that. Then there is the public key corresponding to that private key. So going back, the user, the application, and the device. So that public key that you see now, when you register that user, the public key is available, and you can store it into your FIDO server or key management. So the uniqueness of this is, for every device, for a specific user, for a specific application, there is only one combination of a private key and a public key. And the private key is always in that particular device. This is how FIDO works under the hood. So now, if I have another application, one was, let's say it was abc.com, second is xyz.com, I have yet another key and the same registration process. Now, you might think, oh my God, I'm a large enterprise, and I keep acquiring multiple companies. Obviously, they have different domain names. What does it really mean? I'll give you another example. I have a large financial institution. They got mortgage business, credit card business, checking account, right? All of these things, they all have different URLs. Does it mean that even though I am a customer of that institution, for each of those URLs, I have to go keep registering every time? Because by FIDO standard, it is tied to the device, the user, and the domain, the application. Yes, driving that user experience and security, Transmit has taken that to the next level, and we have solved that problem of making sure that, hey, you can register once, and we will basically figure out how to transfer that trust to the other domains as well. And we'll get in depth as to how do we do that. But know that, yes, these are all the innovations that we have done, and we'll be able to show that to you. So this is the registration part. Fast forward to what happens now. You want to log into that app. All that happens is the application, when you present it onto that device, whatever device you have, say, hey, I want to log in. User clicks on the login. And basically, you are presented with, you call it as a challenge, a nonce, something that you're going to tell that application or that user, saying, hey, you know you have that private key? I want you to sign this message using the private key that is stored in the hardware. Okay, how do I get that private key? The only way to get the private key is using your biometric. the biometric that you used during the registration process. Whether it is your touch ID, face ID, external dongle, whatever that you used. That means it is tied to that specific individual, and the fact that the key is only on that device, it is tied to that device. So now you are going to release that by placing or unlocking that key using the biometric, and now the challenge gets signed, and the signed message comes back. Keep in mind, you have the public key. Now, with certainty, I can verify the authenticity of that message being signed by that particular user on that particular device for that particular domain. And now you can say, yes, I have 100% confidence, and you're going to allow that user to log into that application. Yes? Nope. A key pair is already generated for the first time when you register. So there is a private key. So for that particular user, for each application, there is already a key pair assigned to you. The registration is always new on a combination of user, domain, and the device. So if you got 3 devices, yes, you potentially have 3 different key pairs for the same application. Okay, so you want to do it yourself. Absolutely, I think it's a great effort that you want to go and then build it. So if you take a step back, what was needed? You needed a system to manage all the keys. Hopefully that is scalable. You needed the ability to integrate WEBAUTHN and then invoke that. But keep in mind certain things, what I mentioned about ATO, about user experience. You really need to have a strong security background to understand that user lifecycle that I showed earlier, depending upon the applications that you are trying to have the user really subscribe to from a passwordless experience. What are the potential weakest links in that user experience? As an example, some of us use sometimes an incognito mode of browser. I get a new iPhone. What's my experience when I get a new iPhone? To your point, hey, I already registered just because I changed a phone. Do I have to go through the enrollment process? And especially during enrollment process, for the first time, how do I know that this is indeed John? Maybe sometimes I want to see the driver's license. I want to see a selfie. You can perform additional verification of that user for the first time when you're doing a trust building. When somebody is opening a new account, when somebody is enrolling into passwordless for the first time, you really want to have multiple ways to verify that user. Now, if I get a new iPhone, obviously there is no key, right? For that application, for that user, what do I do? How do I leverage? Maybe you got 5 other devices that you already have established trust. Can I find a way to leverage the trust that I already built on the other devices in that ecosystem and then bring the new device into that user's network? Yes, you can. So knowing how I can accomplish all of those things is very foundational in really building an end-to-end system that is secure, that drives the right balance between customer experience and security, that understands different corner cases when it comes to FIDO or even non-FIDO devices. What do you do? In certain part of the world, there are a lot of devices that don't have biometric. Can I still provide a passwordless solution? Other options? And when I do provide other options, how does my application know? Do I need to treat everybody the same? Can I do something called a level of assurance? Saying that, look, this user, although used, say, a magic link or some sort of a one-time email OTP code or whatever, knowing that I cannot treat this customer same as someone who authenticated with a biometric. So really having all of that understanding when you build a system is really key. Or in other words, what we have built is a service that obviously builds on FIDO, builds on OpenID, that is transparent, frictionless, but frankly, where we take a lot of pride is in ensuring that the end-to-end service is context-aware. We are able to assess the risk at all times, whether it is at authentication or after authentication or when they're performing. And as a result of that context, being able to invoke dynamically, being able to adapt and say, oh, now I want to do an ID verification. Oh, I want to do something else from a user journey perspective. While the user sees only a biometric or anything, having a system that contiguously assesses risk and is able to dynamically invoke different services or different experiences is what truly gets you what I call as an end-to-end passwordless service that focuses on user experience without compromising on the security. And that is the true solution for defending against ATO. So with this quick background, we are actually going to jump in to an actual application. So what Balu is going to show now is we have an application where you log in with username and password. What does it take? So he's going to show you what changes we need to do on the front end, what happens in the back end on the FIDO side, and what the user experience is. But Balu, over to you.
Yep, thanks, Raj. Okay. So before we actually look at that application, I'll use a couple of slides to show what we are trying to do. Right? So to start with, we have a very simple web application built on JavaScript, HTML for the front end, and for the back end, it's Node.js based. All that it does is first request gets the index page. It's the login page, right? User submits the credential, username and password in this case. Click submit. The backend Node.js application checks the credentials. In my case, it's just going to check for a hard-coded value, Balu as a username, a particular password, and if that matches, it logs the user in and shows a logged in page. It's that simple, that application. We will take that application and enable passwordless on it. Right? So 2 steps for it. One is the registration process. Right? Now you'll be able to correlate this with what Raj was showing earlier around the registration. The first couple of things are same, right? User gets a page, submits the username and password, everything is okay, and the login page is, dashboard page is there, right? And along with the dashboard page, we will show them a call to action button, in this case a register for passwordless button. And user clicks on the passwordless button, it invokes our BINDID service. BINDID service does all the FIDO magic, enrolls the keys, and gives the unique identifier back to the application. And now that all that backend application has to do is attach that identifier to user who just logged in, right? Application knows who logged in because the user entered the username and password and the user is logged in. BINDID gave them an identifier back, and the application now attaches these two together. In my sample app case, it just stores that mapping in memory saying, okay, Balu means this ID from BINDID. That's all it does for registration. In a real world application, it would be a record attribute in that user's LDAP record, maybe a column in their database profile, or maybe on their NoSQL object an additional attribute, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So how does the login flow work, right? Very similar, right? Application is now there, user has a passwordless button, user clicks on that, gets to the BINDID page, BINDID does the FIDO authentication, generates the same identifier. The key is it generates the same identifier as it was generated for the registration process, and it sends back to the application. Now the application looks up its mapping table where it had stored all this mapping of username to the identifier. Now it finds a record, okay, I know this identifier belongs to Balu, and it logs the user as Balu. That's all there is to it. So now actually let's jump into the code and look what needs to be done. So this is the simple application that we have, which you can see a username and password, right? And let me show that how I log into this. Username and password, I'm logged in, gets a dashboard page. This is the first slide that we talked about. Now we are going to enable passwordless on this. Before we enable passwordless, you have to set up the service in BINDID. And let me first show you how to set that up. Very simple, few clicks. I'm going to log into my BINDID admin console, and you can imagine that is protected using BINDID itself. It's asking me to present my biometrics on the laptop, and I'm going to click and present my finger, and now I'm logged in into the BINDID console. And this is where you need to set up that basic configuration that's needed. So I'll go into my application list, create a new application. Very simple things needed. I'll call it demo app. Use the same thing for description. An optional logo, right? Let's pick a logo. Demo app here, demo app here. Now all that is needed is what we call as the redirect URL, right? So if you are familiar with the OIDC flow, once authentication is complete, we have to send the user back to the application. So there is a URL needed for it. So that's what is needed. And in my case, it is going to be this URL plus some additional parameters so that the application knows which flow it is, whether it's the login flow or registration flow. I'm going to put that in as well here. So I'll put it here, type equal to login, which shows my login flow. I'll have another one for type equal to register. So that's all I register, right? That's all I need for the configuration itself, and we are all done. So this has given me two values, client ID and client secret, and this is what I will need to configure the application. So let's save this, and now let's actually switch into the code, right? So this is the application as is now, right? If you look at this, very simple HTML, it takes a username, password that the user enters, sends it to the backend API called login, sends the value, and then if it gets a success, OK message, it shows logged in page, failure, it shows a failure page. That's all it is, the front end as of now. And the corresponding backend is very simple. There's a login API that the front end is calling. It's looking for a username called Balu and a password called this is unsafe. And if it matches, it logs the user in. That's all it's doing. Now we are going to make this passwordless aware, right? So instead of me trying to code all this, I have that already there. I'll copy paste that into this and kind of talk about what are the key changes. So let's make the front end change first. Go to index.html page, passwordless. This option has all the changes that I need. I'm going to copy paste that into the actual front end application. And I'm going to talk about key aspects of this. What we need this, right? You have to first import one of our SDKs, and that is this one, line number 6. And there is an SDK for web, SDK for mobile as well, right? In this case, it's a web application. And we are going to initialize the SDK. You can see here, I need to provide the client ID that we created. And then all you need is invoke that OIDC flow, right? I'm calling a function on the SDK to invoke the OIDC flow. So this will be called by the register button as well as the login button. And the type in that function indicates whether it's login or register, right? If you look at the type, says okay, so that it knows where to redirect the user back. That's all it is. And if you look at the backend, let's go to a passwordless backend and copy paste that into the actual one that we want to run, right? Here you can see that there is our old login function here, right, which was always there, and I've added two more functions here called register passwordless and login passwordless. All these are going to just get the code from the front end HTML page and then send it to the backend of BINDID, exchange that code for a token, and then that has our identifier in. So those are the only changes needed to make this application passwordless. And let's run this now and see it in action. If there are any, everybody tracking so far? Any questions? Good? Okay. So let's restart the app because we made some changes, right? Let's restart the app. Okay. And we'll touch it again. Right, you can see that it has changed. I have a passwordless button now and log in another way, right? So before enabling passwordless, in our case, we need to know who the user is. So I'm going to say log in another way and log in using my older credentials. Okay, logged in. You can see there is a call to action button. In my case, I've just put it upstairs there. But in a real scenario, it might be an overlay or much more prominent than this. I'm going to click register for passwordless, and that invokes our BINDID service using OIDC, and it's showing me this screen, right? And I can use my MacBook in this case to authenticate, or I can use my mobile device. We'll try different flows first. So let's register using the MacBook. I'm going to present my Touch ID on the Mac. And it says message saying that you have successfully registered for passwordless login, and I am now back in the app, right? So now if I log out, I can come back in and just click on passwordless and log in. So let's try that out, right? Click on passwordless login. Again, redirect to the service. It's doing the same authentication. I present my biometrics, and there you go, I'm logged in, right? So let's see whether I can show you the same experience on a mobile device as well. Go ahead. Yeah, in this case, so it took me to a BINDID service page, right? And I clicked on the continue button so that I can present biometrics.
So is there a way that instead of having to click, take a drop and a click there, just go straight to the prompt because it's kind of has some idea of who you should be?
Yeah, so that is skippable. There's a way we can integrate this directly into the app itself to avoid this kind of redirects wherein you don't have to specifically click that button. Okay, thanks. And anybody knows why you have to click that button in this case? Because it's actually a security mechanism of the browser, right? If you look at Safari, Safari says that you can invoke web authentication only if there is a user action, because they don't want some redirects to invoke FIDO, right? So by clicking the button, Safari is making sure that user is doing something before invoking FIDO authentication.
So could you get rid of the step at this page then?
Yeah, so we can actually put the button here, right?
Yeah, it seems like somewhere along the line you have to
Do something, correct. That's correct. Yeah, it has to be either on this page or on the other page.
So, it probably can't be removed from the second page, but it could probably be removed here.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, just thinking.
Yeah. So let's see whether I can show you the same experience on the mobile device, how it looks like. We saw it on the Mac, right? And this, if my device is mirrored, it's here. Okay, so let's test this out on this, right? Passwordless login. It takes me to the same one, but now I am going to say, I want to log in using my mobile device. Let's take the scenario of you are using a kiosk or something, right? That device is not registered, so you would definitely have to use your mobile device in that case. And this is the experience you would see when you are using a kiosk mode where the device is not registered. It's asking me to scan this QR code using my mobile device. And I'm not going to use any app or anything here. It's just the camera on this device that I'm going to use, right? I'm going to open the camera, scan this QR code, right? And that is opening up a mobile browser on my device here, right? Again, no app involved. I click approve. It asks me for the biometrics on the device, Face ID, that completes authentication, and now I'm logged into the app, right? So one of the key value prop is it's basically understanding and linking multiple devices so that the chance of you ending up with single device that you enroll for passwordless and losing it, right? When you do that, how do you recover back, right? You have to figure out how to get that binding back. And one of the key thing that service does is give you multiple avenues to enroll more devices so that the chance of you losing that single device is very, very less. So that's not the only recovery mechanism. We have other mechanisms like a custodian email, right? I could say, I could enlist my wife as a custodian for my BINDID, and in case I lose my device, I can ask her to get my binding back. So there are multiple options. Another option is KYC, like a document scanning, those kind of things. Tracking so far? Good? Okay, perfect. Any questions on what you saw so far?
Is there a way to do maybe I'll get this a little backwards, but is there a way, like on the mobile, to use like your other device instead, like your laptop to approve it?
Oh yeah. So let's say I have only my laptop, right? And I picked up a new mobile device. So BINDID is going to say, oh, I don't know who you are. Put in your login hint, which in our case it's email. So you put in your email address, and then BINDID knows, okay, this email address I've seen before. This email has multiple other devices. Then it'll give you a list of devices that you already have, and it'll ask you to approve on that device. And once you approve, it links all these devices together.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, that gives you that back
Right, yeah, it's a dynamic linking and the recovery of device using other device. That's one of the key features. Yeah. Okay, so I think this is one challenge that we have been dealing with, right? Okay, let's go back here. Okay, perfect. So now we have looked at how to enable passwordless, right? But it won't be successful unless your users adopt it, right? You have to make sure your users adopt passwordless solution. So how do we do it? We have had success with customers by having them inject this into their account recovery flows, like forgot password, right? So when you hit forgot password, instead of sending them a new password or a temporary password, send them a link to enroll in passwordless. Right? That's one way to get it. Similarly, forgot username flows. Inject in those flows where users are more likely to enroll in passwordless because they have seen the pain of using passwords. For new account opening, put passwordless as your primary option, right? Instead of providing password option, put passwordless as your primary option to enroll new users. And for users who don't want to use it, give them password as a fallback option. Right? Third one is incentivizing users, right? It could be depend on use case. For retail customers, it could be like providing them a discount code if you enroll in passwordless. For banking, it could be giving them a discount on their service fee or something like that. It's very use case dependent, but incentivize users. And last but not the least, educate these users, your customers, on benefit of passwordless, right? It might be very evident to you, all of us in this room, the reason for going passwordless, but not so much to our customers. So all these are very important. These are some snapshots of the BINDID passwordless service screens that we looked at, right? We created an application, right? But it goes much beyond that. There is a tab for users where it lists all the users enrolled. It has risk and trust modules, right? You can say, okay, I want to block access from certain countries. I want to enable a improbable travel, like, so like a user logging in from here today now, and within 5 minutes logging in from Boston, right? There are different trust and risk modules that you can enable to provide additional risk capability to the platform. Detailed activity logs. You saw a very vanilla BINDID screen today, but it's fully customizable and brandable to your branding needs. Right? And obviously, like we need today, global multi-language support as well. This is a snapshot of how an end user of BINDID can manage their devices. They can log into the self-service portal. They can see all the devices they have. They can kick one off if they no longer want it. They can see all their activities that they have done, right? And this all helps them to keep track of their various devices and keep it in a hygienic manner. Any questions so far? Good? Okay, so now we saw passwordless on a web application, right? But it doesn't stop there. Once you have acquired this customer on a web channel or some channel like that, you can use it across channels. You can use it on mobile device, call center platforms, etc. Right? So if a user enrolled into web calls into a call center, you can authenticate that call center call center user using the same technique, and the agent can, to a high assurance level, know that it's the same user. And same works for mobile device, kiosk, etc. Right? And I think this is all I have on my last slide, some info about a playground app that you can go, and it's all available publicly. You can go test it out. There is detailed documentation on it, and you can even sign up for a test sandbox to integrate with your application, right? You don't need a sandbox to test out a developer app. You can see all these flows that we saw here today on the playground itself. Any questions? That's all I have. If you have questions, I can take it. If not, thanks all of you for coming, spending 50 minutes with us. Hopefully, all of you feel a little empowered to take on the passwordless journey and help our customers and your organizations. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.